is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer here. We got a lot to talk about on today's episode. The Combine is underway in Indianapolis. We'll have the latest, what we've heard from Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh from there. Also, the NFL salary cap took a massive jump. How could it affect the Ravens? We'll break that down. And finally, we'll look at the Ravens' own impending free agents and place them into bins based on how likely it is that they return to Baltimore. All that and much, much more. But first, a quick word from our sponsors.
If you have an appetite for saving money, then you should get the Rofo Rewards app from Royal Farms. Use the Rofo Rewards app to place mobile orders for pickup or delivery and earn royalty points to redeem for free stuff. And right now, new Rofo Rewards members will get a free any-size coffee for signing up. You can download the Rofo Rewards app at the Apple App Store or Google Play today. You'll find it's a very appealing app to have. Real fresh, real fast. Royal Farms.
The CIAA Men's and Women's Basketball Tournament is February 26th through March 3rd at CFG Bank Arena. Baltimore is bringing the hoops, the culture, and the energy. So grab your tickets now and book your hotel at baltimore.org/CIAA.
All right, Jonas, first and foremost, we just heard from Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh in Indianapolis. They had a lot to discuss. Let's talk about what they said about Justin Madubuike. In the ongoing negotiations, they said that Eric DeCosta did say that they are hoping to get a deal done, but right at the buzzer, right before the press conference was about to end, he was asked if they would tag Madubuike if they're unable to get a long-term deal done, place that franchise tag on the defensive tackle, and he said probably. So pretty much confirming what we knew.
Yeah, grateful to Eric DeCosta that we got a little bit more information than we did at the season-ending presser, where a question about Justin Madubuike and his future got lumped into a answer about Madubuike's future and Patrick Queen's future. But at least now we know that Justin Madubuike is target 1A for the Ravens, and I don't know if there's even a target 1B on this roster because of just where he is and his value to this team, and the fact that the Ravens don't have another game-breaking defensive tackle like they do with inside linebacker, with Roquan Smith kind of obviating the need for a Patrick Queen mega deal. So, obviously the discussions are still ongoing. The Ravens could not get a deal done with Madubuike by that franchise deadline and still be able to work it out by mid-July, I believe is usually the deadline. So there will be some more twists and turns to this Madubuike situation. I would imagine that the Ravens probably do not get a deal done by that Tuesday deadline, but that still doesn't really mean anything hugely significant, just probably a little less salary cap space for the coming, league year and the start of free agency in general.
And we do have an idea of exactly how much that salary tag, or that franchise tag, I should say, is going to cost. $22.1 million for defensive linemen in 2024. We found that out when we found out about the salary cap's massive jump. More on that later. But Jonas, these two were also asked about the Zay Flowers situation, and they didn't provide much of an update other than the statement that they had released a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, this is just straight out of the PR playbook, just saying they're aware of the situation. They expressed, an awareness of the importance of domestic violence and handling all that, but it is just pretty much the status quo. Again, when we asked the NFL last week for an update on their own investigation, which we don't even know whether that exists, didn't really get much of a response. Haven't gotten much of a response from the Ravens as for what might be going on behind the scenes with them. Obviously, the fact that the alleged domestic violence incident involving Zay is, for the time being, not going to lead into any charges, probably means that he will be on this roster for this foreseeable future, at least for the foreseeable near future. So I think, probably not a whole lot of news coming out of this week on Zay, and might not be any news coming on Zay for the next couple of weeks, couple months. It's pretty much just kind of wait and see mode for us all involved here.
Yeah, and both DeCosta and Harbaugh were asked about the offensive line, and DeCosta said, we have to have a big, strong, imposing offensive line, so we'll continue to build that out. This is an area of concern this offseason because you've got two older guys bookending your tackle position. You've got a couple guards that could be headed towards free agency. Really, the only sure thing on that offensive line right now is Tyler Linderbaum, the center. And clearly, DeCosta and Harbaugh have prioritized the O-line this offseason.
Yeah, and if they do, then that probably means that they won't have a whole lot of money to spend on a top free agent running back. As we're going to talk about, there is only so much money in that war chest of the Ravens, and if you spend big or continue spending big at certain positions like the Ravens have with Ronnie Stanley, then that is going to cut into the pie for other spots. But a theme of this week, a theme of today, a theme of the offseason is going to be how the Ravens remake their offensive line, whether the Ravens remake their offensive line at certain spots. Obviously, there is, already one guy we know who's heading to free agency, and Kevin Zeitler, because the Ravens did not get that deal done before the void year deadline. John Simpson, another pending free agent. Morgan Moses mentioned as a potential salary cap casualty. Ronnie Stanley dealing with a contract that is probably not commensurate with his level of play this past year, nor these past couple of years. So a lot of spinning plates for Eric DeCosta to handle right about now.
Let's talk about that salary cap exploding like it did. It is set now at $255.4 million, an unprecedented bump of nearly $30 million from last year, higher than everybody's expectations and projections. Jonas, you wrote about on the BaltimoreBanner.com, where you can subscribe for just $1 for 6 months, about the different ways in which the salary cap jump could affect the Ravens. You mentioned 3 ways, 2 of which are positive, 1 probably negative. They might not have to release as many guys, like you mentioned, between Ronnie Stanley and Morgan Moses, these guys that are carrying big salary cap numbers. They may be able to keep a few more of those guys on the roster. Maybe Patrick Ricard, who has a $5.2 million cap hit. Maybe that's a little bit easier to swallow because of the jump in the salary cap. There's also less pressure to restructure contracts. The Ravens tend not to do this as much as other teams like the Saints that are constantly pushing money into the future and just kicking the can down the road. But they have done it in the past, and they did it last offseason as they were preparing to pay Lamar Jackson all that they were preparing to pay for, basically adding these future void years onto future contracts that end up creating this dead cap money in the future. The Ravens might not have to do as much of that this offseason because of the salary cap jump, but they also may have less flexibility because in the free agent market, because this is a team that relies on signing free agents who were cut by other teams as cap casualties. When teams realize that they can't afford to pay these guys, they cut them. The Ravens like to sign those guys because they don't affect the compensation picks, compensatory draft pick formula for the Ravens going forward, which means that they can stockpile these draft picks in the 3rd to 4th to 5th rounds of the NFL draft, and they don't have to then lose compensatory picks by signing these guys. So larger salary cap means fewer cap casualties around the league, which means fewer free agents for the Ravens to potentially sign.
Yeah, I think the big advantage that kind of accrues to the Ravens is they have what a lot of other teams don't have right now, which is a good thing, I think, when you have as many good players as the Ravens do. And that factor is cost certainty. They know how much Ronnie Stanley would cost. They know how much Morgan Moses would cost. They know how much Patrick Ricard would cost. If they were a team that did not have starters at certain spots who are entrenched, and obviously those guys are a little bit up in the air right now, then you are talking about going to a market that is now going to be overflowing with teams that have more money than they expected. And that creates bidding wars that the Ravens have not typically been too eager to get into. When you think about the Ravens spending ethos, it has been invest from within, sign those guys to long-term deals before they hit the market, because you're not going to be able to win a betting war for someone like Matthew Judon in recent years, or Zadarius Smith. So I think the Ravens strategy of, spending money on guys who you believe will be foundational tentpole players for the long term really, tends to reap rewards in a case like this, because how much someone will cost in a certain year, and you hope that that is less than what it would take to get someone of comparable value on the open market. So I think it's definitely a good thing for teams like the Ravens, who have so much money invested in certain players, and they may not be playing up to that contract, but at least you know what it would take to bring them back, and you know that maybe if you go, in free agency trying to get someone of equal or similar value, you might have to overpay in a situation like that. So, as Eric DeCosta said, it was nice to see that number. It doesn't mean that we're going to just open up the books and go shopping. That's not really the Ravens' way. But I think you'd much rather have this cap at $255 million compared to $245 million.
Yeah, the Ravens are uniquely poised to kind of benefit from it, but every team is going to benefit from the salary cap jumping in some way or another. All right, Jonas, we took a look at all of the impending free agents on the Ravens roster, 22 of them after they re-signed Nelson Agholor for the upcoming season, and we've placed them into buckets. We've got the can't lose bucket, we've got the good is gone bucket, the time to find a realtor buddy bucket. Jonas, you named that one. Very well done. Right player, right price bucket. Essentially, if they fit into the Ravens budget, we could see them coming back. And we've dropped all of these guys into these buckets, and we've got analysis for that. Jonas, do you want to start with the can't lose bucket? There's really only one player in this bucket.
Yeah, it's a player who's big enough to fill a bucket by himself. It's the Mr. Widebody himself, Justin Madubuike. Not as big as Michael Pierce, obviously, but I don't think anything the Ravens have done this offseason, even toward the end of the 2023 season, suggests that they are willing to lose Justin Madubuike unless they just are offered a king's ransom in a tag and trade scenario. And that is something that maybe we should talk about on a future show, just what it would take to kind of wrangle a guy like Madubuike away from the Ravens. You rarely see guys of his value tagged and traded. You rarely see tag and trades in general, but the stats speak for themselves. 13 sacks, most among interior defensive linemen in the NFL this past season. Most quarterback pressures in a season since 2016 after JaMarr Clowney and what he did this past year. Since 2016 or so. So it's going to take a lot to keep him. Obviously, that $22 million would really limit the Ravens' salary cap flexibility, but you are putting that tag on him to hopefully give yourself more of a pathway to signing him long term. He's only 26. He might not even be in his athletic prime. So I just think, considering what the spine of the Ravens defense was this past year and what it could be moving forward, he's a guy that you want to prioritize above all others.
Yeah, we said on our last podcast, we really broke down the franchise tag situation in depth and came to the conclusion that the non-exclusive franchise tag, if the Ravens are able to not work out a long-term deal with Justin Madubuike, it's that non-exclusive tag that makes the most sense. And our opinions haven't changed in the past week, despite the fact that a few days have gone by with that window opening and the Ravens have not yet tagged Madubuike. But we expect either that or a long-term deal before that window closes. All right, the good is gone bucket. Jonas, we got 4 guys in here. I think the top name, obviously, is going to trigger some Ravens fans who were hoping that some way, somehow, this guy was going to be able to stay in Baltimore. But it's just very, very difficult to imagine a scenario in which Patrick Queen, coming off an all-pro season, coming off a Pro Bowl season, who's projected, according to Pro Football Focus, to make 4 years, $72.5 million in free agency. It's just hard to see him coming back to Baltimore when they already have a $100 million linebacker in Roquan Smith.
Yeah, I think the writing was on the wall when they drafted Trenton Simpson last year. And if that writing was sketched out in pencil, then it was probably traced over in pen with what we saw in Week 18 from Trenton. Really, really impressive performance against the Steelers, much cheaper than PQ obviously would be. It was a little surprising to see only $18 million a year for PQ, because I think, for Roquan to get $20 million a year without having to get to the open market, and now we have this explosion in the salary cap, I imagine there will be a bidding war for Patrick Queen. We know what he can do as a blitzer. I think that's going to add a couple $1 million a year to his value, because, what do teams value more than anything that's statistically, consistent? It's pass rush protection. And we know that Patrick Queen can deliver that to you, whether it's in a pass rush game or he's just, beating up on a running back. So I think it's going to be way too expensive, obviously, to bring him back. Some team is going to have a burning need for PQ, and unfortunately for him, and unfortunately for the Ravens, it's not going to be Baltimore.
Yeah, the three other guys that we have on this list, we've got Jadeveon Clowney, Kevin Zeitler, and Gino Stone. Clowney signed that 1-year deal last offseason, really into training camp. I believe it was July when he signed that 1-year, $10 million deal. He's projected right now to get 1 year, $9 million with $8 million guaranteed. He had a great year, tied a career high with 9.5 sacks, fifth in ESPN's pass rush win rate. If he goes, David Ojabo is going to have to step up, and the Ravens are probably going to have to draft somebody along that defensive line. Even if he returns, they're probably going to have to draft somebody along that defensive line. But it's also paying a guy into his 30s who is coming off, a career year is difficult for this team right now that is going to have to invest a lot of money in their defensive tackle, whether it's franchise tagging him or extending him, and is going to have to invest a lot of money in other spots on this roster.
Yeah, you're just trusting in the infrastructure. You're trusting in the ascendant talent. Chuck Smith coming back. We saw the incredible work that he did with the pass rushers, not just the outside linebackers, but the defensive linemen as well. A lot of praise from John Harbaugh today for Odafe Oweh, and saying that he's not too worried about the 5 sack seasons that he's put in, because he sees there's more information to be gleaned from his disruption, from his pressures. So you hope that Odafe can make that step next year. The interesting thing for the Ravens is that this really isn't too deep of a class of edge rushers. I mean, when I did my mock draft, I didn't really see anyone who wet my whistle on day 1 or day 2. I don't think I took a pass rusher until the 5th round, and those guys are primarily run first dudes with not supreme athletic traits. So I don't think this is a situation where the Ravens could really find a obvious replacement on day 1 or day 2, which really complicates the potential for losing a guy like Clowney. But if all the Ravens get out of Jadeveon Clowney is one of his best seasons of his career, and a 4th or 5th round compensatory pick, I think the investment in him this past year will definitely have been worth it.
Yeah, I think there are a couple guys that, as we get closer to the draft, April 25th, I believe, is the first day of the draft. I think there are a couple guys that might slot into that spot at the back end of the first round. I think, what is his name? Braylon Trice, I've seen from Washington, as kind of a guy that might be in that spot. So there are a couple guys, but maybe they'll focus on other positions. Zeitler, you put into this good as gone bucket. I thought he was the only one that I really would consider as somebody who might be back in Baltimore, just because he seems to love it. He was a very valuable interior offensive lineman for the Ravens, and PFF projects him to make $13 million, $7.25 million guaranteed, 2-year deal. I mean, I think that's 2 years, $15 million, $9 million guaranteed. I think that's doable for the Ravens. It would just take a little bit of investment into that interior offensive line that they haven't shown particularly willing or eager to invest in.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of these deals are doable. The Ravens could, free up like $40 million in space just with these simple contract restructures. But the fact that they had an opportunity to keep Kevin Zeitler from free agency before that void deadline and didn't really make a whole lot of headway in doing so, and now he's going to have more of a market than just one team in Baltimore. The fact that the Ravens have invested in the position last year, they're probably going to invest this year, drafting Saleh, drafting Voorhees. They have been in Cleveland who did some nice things at right guard. And, it seems like Ben Cleveland is kind of right guard only just because of his athletic limitations and that lack of flexibility. So you at least have a pretty good idea of what he could be if he steps in for Kevin Zeitler. I just think it's hard to imagine, unless there's really not a market that develops for Kevin Zeitler, him coming back to Baltimore. So maybe he, we look back at this and, we say that he should have fit in the time to find a realtor buddy conversation. But I just think, as with PQ, it seems like the writing is on the wall with this one.
Yeah, same with Gino Stone. Eric DeCosta was asked about him at the Combine. it just doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of room for somebody who wants to be a starting safety in the NFL and will probably get paid by a team to be a starting safety. They have Marcus Williams. They have Kyle Hamilton. DeCosta called him maybe the best 7th-round pick in franchise history, which is really Zach Sealer erasure. But, it's still he's still worthy of that consideration for that. But, yeah, some team is going to pay him to be a starter, and it won't be the Ravens.
Yeah, I mean, they are already investing a huge amount of money in Marcus Williams. They invested a huge amount of draft capital in Kyle Hamilton. Even if you're paying Gino Stone $6 or $7 million a year, which is the PFF projection, that's still a lot of money for a guy who, depending on how things shake out, might not be on the field for every defensive snap. And I think if you're paying a guy that amount of money, you want him to be a 100% snap guy, and the Ravens just don't have room in the inn for that type of investment.
Yeah, time to find a realtor, buddy. I believe there are 9 players in this category. It's OBJ, it's Kyle Van Noy, it's Tyler Huntley, Gus Edwards, John Simpson, Josh Johnson, Rock Yassin, Tyler Ott, and Devin Duvernay. OBJ projected to make 1 year, $10 million, according to PFF. DeCosta said at the Combine, he's still texting with OBJ, and he said, quote, "I think we'll just kind of assess and see what happens over the next couple of weeks." John Harbaugh said he was crossing his fingers about potentially getting OBJ back. Personally, I think it might be a little bit too much money for a little too little production at this point in his career. But look, the Ravens clearly valued having that veteran presence in the locker room. They clearly valued somebody who wants to play with Lamar, who is eager to play in this offense and in this city. They already have Nelson Aguilar back in the fold, but I don't know. If the price is right, I think it could make sense. I just tend to lean towards him leaving.
Yeah, I mean, if this were 3 or 4 years ago, or if Odell were 3 or 4 years younger, then I think it would make sense. I don't think we'll ever see the explosive OBJ that we did in New York, in Cleveland. I just think, as with a lot of guys, they tend to lose a little bit of that 5th gear the older they get. It was interesting to me, Paul, that, when I did the story on the lack of connection between Lamar, Rashad Bateman, who got a nice shout out today from John Harbaugh, like the only guy who had a worse luck with catching accurate passes or getting accurate passes downfield than Rashad Bateman. One of the few guys was, in fact, Odell. I don't know if he had the separation that Rashad did. I'm a little bit curious to kind of go back and look at the film and see just how open, OBJ was getting relative to a guy like Rashad Bateman. I still think he can do a lot with his route running, with his releases, with his, just catching ability for a team. I don't think $10 million is out of the question for a guy with his track record and what he brings, not only to a receiving room, but to a locker room, to a team that just needs that OBJ, fairy dust that kind of helps boost their social media clout. But I agree with you with the investment in Aguilar, with the wide receivers that you can probably get in this draft, with Zay Flowers likely coming back, with Rashad Bateman hopefully, ready to step into that wide receiver 2 hole. It is just tough to see him come back. And, there's an incentive to get a deal done, because if they can get something worked, out with Odell, then you negate that cap hit that's going to, level $11 million against this 2024 cap until June 1st. Even if they designate him a post June 1 cut, you still have to, carry that water for the next couple of months. So there's a lot of pressure to get that deal done, but Odell's a businessman, and I don't think he's in the business of giving team-friendly deals at this point.
If we're paying $10 million for social media clout, I mean, I should be getting at least in the $5 million range, you would think, Jonas, based off the impressions and engagement that I generate for at All Banner Sports.
Unfortunately, the journalism salary cap has not risen in step with the NFL salary cap.
Yeah, it's a little tough. A $30 million bump this year would have been nice. 3 guys that are projected, according to PFF, to get 1-year deals for less than $5 million. Kyle Van Noy, who had a great year but turns 33 next month. Tyler Huntley, who we've seen be a serviceable backup in this league. And Gus Edwards, who obviously became the Ravens' main back this year with J.K. Dobbins being out. You look at their price tags and you say, all three of these deals are doable, but all three of these guys, I think there are reasons why they probably will not return to the Ravens.
Yeah, but if you're the Ravens and you're looking at a $3.3 million price tag for Kyle Van Noy, which is the PFF projection, I'm saying hell yeah. I'm saying bring him back. You think of all the important moments that he showed up for, despite only showing up to Baltimore as a midseason guy. I mean, you think
Ill-timed
about that.
penalty in the playoffs, gotta say.
Yeah, for sure. But you think about like even overtime against the Rams, where he hits that guard with a spin move to throw off the Matthew Stafford pass over the middle, I think, which is like ends up being dropped. But he had the back-to-back sacks against Seattle that really swung the tide in the Ravens' favor. And obviously, maybe he's not as effective in year 2 with Mike McDonald leaving, and we don't know kind of how Zach Orr orients these guys. But if you're saying pay Kyle Van Noy $3.3 million, I'm running up the check to his agent and saying, come back. That's nothing in terms of the bigger salary cap picture. If you can get 6 or 7 sacks from a guy and pay him just $3 million, that's good business. Even though he does turn 33 next month, I still think that, relative to what the Panthers, for instance, paid Justin Houston, which was $6 million, that's a relative bargain.
And then Gus Edwards, I think, is also a fascinating case just because of his history with the Ravens. And we've seen him be able to, be the Ravens' lead back. But look at somebody with that much tread on his tires at this point, who's going to be probably paid by another team to be RB1 or RB 1.5 by another team. And you think maybe the Ravens can get by with a draft pick with a cheaper contract, with Keaton Mitchell coming back maybe at some point midway through the year. And then John Simpson, the only hesitation I have here with seeing him go, PFF has projected 2-year, $10.5 million deal, is that if you're talking about both Simpson and Zeitler leaving, that's 2 of your guards. Those are your 2 starting guards leaving in free agency, which is just quite a lot to replace. The draft can't fix everything, for a team. And even though interior offensive line is not the position of highest demand in the NFL, that's still a pretty heavy burden for the Ravens to have to fix during the offseason. Other guys on this list, we have Josh Johnson. Ravens already have Malik Cunningham as their QB3 at the very least. Rock Yassin didn't play a whole lot at cornerback. Tyler Ott, long snapper, in case you were wondering. Ravens have all-pro long snapper Nick Moore coming back from a torn Achilles. And Devin Duvernay, just a $4.3 million base salary for 2023 for 4 catches and 18 yards. So, maybe he has a little bit of special teams juice, but those guys don't offer a whole lot based on what they're projected to get in free agency.
Yeah, I think Duvernay quietly, maybe the worst decision of Eric DeCosta's 2023, just bringing him back at that price tag. We thought that he would look a little bit more like he did in 2022 when he was healthy and fast and running by guys for that first half of the season. But, with the kind of devaluing of special teams in general around the NFL and him not having any burst really at any point last season, even training camp, paying him $4 million, I thought would be sensible. But I think the Ravens would probably have liked to have had that back and rolled into this year. Then you have more money to pay a guy like Matabike, Kyle Van Noy, whomever.
Yeah. All right. Finally, this right player, right price bucket. We've got J.K. Dobbins in there. We've got linebacker Malik Harrison, Delshon Phillips, Ronald Darby, Arthur Mollett, Brent Urban, Sam Mustipher, Daryl Worley. Essentially, if both the team and the player can agree on a price that makes sense, it's possible. You flip a coin that they could be back. J.K. Dobbins, I think, is another fascinating case because PFF has him projected to make just 1 year, $2 million. How much do you trust a running back who has had as many significant injuries as he has in his career? Knee injuries, Achilles injuries, but has also shown flashes of being a legitimate RB1, one of the 15 or 10 best running backs when he's healthy in the NFL. To me, it's just not a whole lot of trust that the Ravens can place in him because you just don't want to be relying on J.K. Dobbins to stay healthy another season and then run into the exact same injury problems that you have unfortunately, in the first several years of his career.
Not just stay healthy, but not be a negative room detriment. I like JK. I always enjoy talking to him, but when you think about his kind of tortured history with the Ravens, you can't help but think about him throwing some shade at the Ravens for playing him in that preseason game, which was the kind of the inciting incident for all this drama. You think about him complaining after that playoff loss to the Bengals a year ago now that he should have been getting those touches in the red zone. Obviously, Tyler Huntley got one of them, and we all know what happened with that. You think about him kind of making some illusions that he never really followed up on about how there were certain people in the Ravens organization who didn't want him to get the arthroscopic surgery that he did toward the end of that 2022 or in the middle of that 22 season, which led him to that incredible run where he as to your point, Paul, was one of the Ravens' best players, one of the NFL's best running backs. I mean, just such a dynamo whenever he was on the field. So I think even though we have free agency coming up in a couple of weeks, we could be talking about JK for a while because we don't know where he is in his rehab. Teams obviously have a better idea than us, but I don't think he's going to be a guy who's signed in the first wave of free agency, maybe not even the second wave of free agency, because that Achilles injury is still like 6 months, 5 months removed from when it actually happened. And there's a lot of uncertainty about just what he's going to be in 2024. He's a lot of tread on those tires, as you said. And even though it might only take a couple million to sign him, it's asking a lot of GMs, of coaches to have that vote of confidence in a guy who just has not had much of a track record of staying healthy.
Yeah, and that is the Ravens' sweet spot is later in free agency because they like to make those 1-year signings when teams are really starting to report to training camp because a lot of guys slip through the cracks, and when their price drops just enough, that's when Eric DeCosta strikes. So maybe we could be talking about a reunion just later on in the process than right now. Anybody else in that bucket that I mentioned, Jonas? There are a lot of guys I feel like that the Ravens hit on with these 1-year deals last year. A lot of guys that were signed, like I said, later on in the process, in the free agency process and closer to the start of training camp. Ronald Darby, I think, is an interesting one because he had a nice bounce back year. 1 year, $2.5 million is his projection. It's just a matter of determining how repeatable is the success for these 1-year deal guys like Clowney, like Darby, like Van Noy, these guys that you hit on for 1 year. Is that a smokescreen? Is that, is that an anomaly, or is it a sign that, hey, these guys do still have a lot of juice left and, maybe they're in their early 30s, but they still have something to go. It's just determining which of those guys still has something left in the tank.
Yeah, I think you trust the guys who've been in Baltimore and shown that they know how to do this, that they know what it takes. They've been there, done that. And to me, that's a guy like Malik Harrison. It's a guy like Brent Urban, Ronald Darby. I think a guy who is from the area and obviously knows about the culture of the Ravens from, even though last year was his first with the organization. But, you think of Malik Harrison. If this team needs an outside linebacker, why not make it Malik Harrison? Why not get a guy who can play inside, who can play outside, who does a lot for you on special teams? He played more snaps than people probably realize in those games against those heavy formation teams like the 49ers. He is critical. He was critical to what the Ravens wanted to do in run defense. I think, he doesn't offer a lot pass rush wise, obviously, because that's not really his full-time occupation. He was, decent at that at Ohio State, but obviously he's been more of a guy who you expect to be an early down defender. So why not bring him back on a deal like what Gino Stone got last year? 1 year, $2 million. Maybe you make it, a multi-year deal because you really like, just what he's shown for you, and you get that kind of cap savings over the long term, like what the Ravens did with Justice Hill last year. Ronald Darby, the fact that he played as well as he did just a year removed from that torn ACL that ended that season in Denver, I think it gives you confidence that for as impressive as he was this past year, 72.2 passer rating allowed when he was targeted in coverage, less than 50% completion percentage allowed when he was targeted in coverage. Why couldn't he be even better in Baltimore next year? So Brent Urban, career highs in sacks, quarterback hits, great locker room presence, good friends with Michael Pierce. There's a lot of guys who you could bring back who, do the play like a Raven business and wouldn't cost you a ton in terms of just giving you a guy who you can rely on for 20 to 30 snaps a game, and really doing a good job of just kind of keeping this train moving, and keeping things on track for a possible Super Bowl appearance.
Well, we know the Ravens can't bring back all 22 of these guys, but we will have complete coverage as we get closer and closer to the start of free agency. March 11th at noon begins the negotiating period. That's when clubs can start talking to unrestricted free agents from other teams. And then 2 days after that is when the new league year and unrestricted free agency officially begins. So less than 2 weeks until then. But in the meantime, the NFL Combine is raging on in Indianapolis. And 2 days from now, we will have Gianna Hahn, fellow beat reporter on the BaltimoreBanner.com, who is in Indy, who will check in with us as to the latest goings on there. So another episode coming later this week on the Banner Ravens podcast. At Jonas_Shaffer is his Twitter handle. I am at Paul Mancano and at All Banner Sports. Thank you so much for everybody for tuning in. Please like, review, subscribe, rate. If you give us a nice review, we will read it out here on the podcast. Another episode coming this Thursday. For Jonas Shaffer, I'm Paul Mancano. Thanks so much for tuning in.